The dirt was still frozen when I fired up the backhoe at 7 in the morning, and I knew someone was going to complain before I even got the first scoop out of the ground. I had been working as a utilities contractor for 15 years in suburban Denver, Colorado, specifically in the Wellington Heights neighborhood, and I had dealt with my fair share of angry homeowners. But nothing quite prepared me for what was about to unfold that Tuesday morning in March. My name is Patterson, and I run a small contracting business that specializes in emergency water and sewer line repairs. The call had come in at 5:30 that morning from the city's water department. There was a major leak on Sycamore Drive, and it was getting worse by the hour. They needed someone out there immediately before the entire street lost water pressure or worse, before the leak undermined the road itself. The house at 4782 Sycamore Drive belonged to a woman named Brenda Lawson, but that was not who I was about to meet. No, the problem was going to come from 4786 Sycamore Drive, right next door. I had seen the type before. The perfectly manicured lawn despite it being early March. The seasonal decorations that were always exactly on theme and never a day late coming down. The luxury SUV that never had a speck of dirt on it. The Ring doorbell. The security cameras pointed not just at her own property, but strategically angled to capture the street and neighboring yards. I had my permits, my authorization from the city, and my crew was scheduled to arrive in about an hour. But I needed to start the excavation immediately because the water main was about 6 feet down, and this was not going to be a quick fix. The backhoe roared to life, diesel engine cutting through the quiet morning air. I had been at it for maybe 20 minutes, had just started making real progress on the trench, when I saw her. She came storming out of her house in a pink bathrobe and designer slippers, her blonde hair in curlers, face already red with fury. She was probably in her mid-40s, with that particular look of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. She was screaming something, but I could not hear her over the engine noise. I held up one finger, the universal sign, for just a minute, and finished the scoop I was working on before shutting down the machine. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, not even waiting for the engine to fully stop. "Do you have any idea what time it is? There are noise ordinances in this neighborhood. I am calling the police right now." I took a deep breath and climbed down from the cab. "Madam, I am with Patterson Utilities. There is a water main break, and I have full authorization from the city to perform emergency repairs." "I do not care who you are with." She was practically vibrating with rage. "You cannot just come into our neighborhood and start tearing up the street without permission. I am the president of the Wellington Heights Homeowners Association, and I did not approve this." There it was. HOA president. That explained everything. "Madam, with all due respect, the city does not need HOA approval for emergency utility repairs on public infrastructure," I said, keeping my voice as calm and professional as possible. "The water main runs under the street, which is city property, not HOA jurisdiction." Her face somehow got even redder. "We have very strict rules about construction noise before 8 a.m. You are in violation of our community standards, and I will have you removed from this property immediately." "The noise ordinance has exemptions for emergency repairs," I explained, pulling out my phone to show her the permit and work order. "I have all the necessary documentation right here." She did not even look at my phone. Instead, she pulled out her own phone and started dialing. "We will just see what the police have to say about this." I sighed and leaned against the backhoe. This was not my first rodeo. I had dealt with HOA board members before, and they almost always backed down once the police explained the situation. But this woman, whose name I still did not know, seemed particularly determined. "Yes, hello, I need to report a disturbance," she said into her phone, her voice suddenly taking on a sugary sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "There is a man with heavy machinery making an absolutely horrendous amount of noise in my neighborhood, and he is tearing up our street without permission. Yes, Sycamore Drive in Wellington Heights. Please send someone immediately." She hung up and gave me a triumphant look. "The police are on their way. I suggest you shut down your little operation before you get arrested." "Madam, I am not shutting down anything. Like I said, this is an emergency repair. Do you see that water bubbling up over there?" I pointed to where the leak was creating a small pond at the edge of the street. "That is your water main. If I do not fix this today, this entire street is going to lose water service, possibly for several days." "That is not my problem," she snapped. "You should have gotten proper authorization through the HOA before starting work. We have procedures for these things." I was about to respond when my phone rang. It was Brenda Lawson, the homeowner whose property the leak was closest to. "Hey, Brenda, what is up?" "Isaac, I am so sorry, but I just got a very nasty call from my neighbor Susan. She said you are tearing up the street and that she is having you arrested. I tried to explain that the city called you about the water leak, but she would not listen." Susan. Of course her name was Susan. It was always a Susan or a Karen or a Debbie. "Do not worry about it, Brenda. Susan just called the cops herself. I will handle it. This is not my first time dealing with an angry HOA president." "She can be really difficult," Brenda said, lowering her voice like Susan might somehow hear her through the phone. "She tried to fine me last year because my grass was a quarter-inch too long according to her measurements." A quarter-inch. I glanced over at Susan, who was now pacing back and forth on her driveway, occasionally shooting death glares in my direction. "Yeah, I am getting that impression. Look, do not stress about it. I have all my permits in order. Once the police get here and see the situation, they will back me up." After I hung up with Brenda, I decided to get back in the backhoe and continue working while I waited for the cops to show up. The leak was not going to fix itself, and every minute I wasted was another gallon of treated water pouring into the ground. Susan immediately started screaming again the moment I fired up the engine, but I just put on my noise-canceling headphones and got back to work. I had the trench down about 4 feet when I saw the patrol car pull up. I shut down the backhoe again and climbed out, pulling off my headphones. 2 officers got out of the car, a younger guy who looked like he was maybe 25, and an older woman who had the bearing of someone who had seen it all and was tired of everyone's nonsense. Susan rushed over to them before they could even close their car doors. "Officers, thank God you are here. This man is destroying our neighborhood. He has been making an ungodly amount of noise since 7 a.m. and he does not have permission from the HOA to be here." The older officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, held up a hand. "Madam, slow down. Let us assess the situation." I walked over with my phone in hand, ready to show them my permits. "Good morning, officers. Isaac Patterson, Patterson Utilities. I am here on an emergency call from the Denver Water Department. There is a significant leak in the water main, and I was dispatched to perform immediate repairs." Officer Martinez looked at my phone, scrolling through the photos of the permit and work order. Her partner, Officer Chen, walked over to examine the leak, which was now even more pronounced than it had been an hour ago. "Madam, what is your complaint exactly?" Officer Martinez asked Susan. "He is violating our noise ordinances. He is tearing up our street without HOA approval, and he is creating a public nuisance." Susan was still in full outrage mode. "I am the president of the Wellington Heights HOA, and I did not authorize this work." Officer Martinez looked from Susan to me and back to Susan. Her expression suggested she already knew where this was going. "Madam, is this street private property or public?" "Well, it is public, but it is in our HOA neighborhood, so we have jurisdiction over what happens here," Susan said, crossing her arms. "That is not how it works," Officer Martinez said, her voice patient but firm. "The HOA has no authority over public streets or public utilities. This contractor has proper authorization from the city to perform emergency repairs. The noise ordinance exemption for emergency utility work is clearly stated in the city code. But he did not get permission from the HOA." Susan was starting to sound shrill now. "He does not need permission from the HOA," Officer Chen chimed in, walking back from his inspection of the leak. "Madam, do you see that water pooling over there? That is a serious problem. If this does not get fixed today, it could undermine the road surface and create a dangerous situation for everyone on this street." Susan's face was doing interesting color changes, cycling from red to purple. "I do not care. He should have notified the HOA first." Officer Martinez closed her notepad. "Madam, there is no violation here. Mr. Patterson has every right to be performing this work, and he is doing so legally with proper authorization. I suggest you go back inside and let him do his job." "This is outrageous," Susan sputtered. "I pay your salary with my taxes. I demand that you remove this man from our neighborhood immediately." I had to suppress a smile at that line. They always said that, like it was some kind of magic spell that would make the police do whatever they wanted. Officer Martinez's expression did not change, but I could see a muscle twitch in her jaw. "Madam, I have explained the situation. There is nothing more I can do here. Mr. Patterson is operating legally, and you need to let him work." Susan opened her mouth to protest again, but Officer Chen cut her off. "Madam, if you continue to interfere with legitimate utility work, we can cite you for obstruction. I strongly suggest you go inside." For a moment, I thought Susan's head might actually explode. But instead, she just let out a noise that was somewhere between a shriek and a growl, spun on her heel, and marched back to her house. She slammed the door so hard I was surprised the glass did not shatter. Officer Martinez turned to me with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Good luck with your repair, Mr. Patterson. Something tells me she is not done yet." "Yeah, I got that feeling too," I said. "Thanks for coming out." "Just doing our job," Officer Chen said. "For what it is worth, my parents live in an HOA neighborhood. I know how crazy some of these board members can get." After the officers left, I got back to work. My crew arrived around 8:30, 3 guys who had been working with me for years. Tommy, my foreman, took one look at Susan's house with all its surveillance cameras and whistled. "We got ourselves a live one, boss," HOA president, I confirmed. "Already called the cops on us once this morning." "Great," muttered Jake, my equipment operator. "Those are always fun." We got the trench down to the water main by around 10 a.m. The break was worse than I had initially thought. The pipe, which was old cast iron, had developed a significant crack, probably due to the freeze-thaw cycles we had been experiencing. It was going to need a full section replacement, not just a patch job. I was in the trench, examining the damage, when I heard a familiar voice shrieking from above. "What do you think you are doing now? You cannot just dig a hole in our street and leave it there." I looked up to see Susan standing at the edge of the excavation, still in her bathrobe, though she had apparently found time to take out the curlers. "Madam, I am repairing the water main, which is exactly what I told you I would be doing 3 hours ago." "How long is this going to take?" she demanded. "You are blocking access to the street." "We have proper traffic control set up," I said, gesturing to the cones and warning signs my crew had placed. "And it is going to take as long as it takes. We are looking at a full section replacement, probably most of the day." "Most of the day?" She looked horrified. "That is completely unacceptable. I have things to do. How am I supposed to get my car out?" I pointed to the very obvious path we had left for traffic to pass on one side of the excavation. "You can drive right around it, madam. We made sure to leave access." "That is not the point." She was gearing up for another tirade when my phone rang. It was the water department. "Excuse me, I need to take this," I said, pulling out my phone and turning away from her. It was Dave Richardson from the water department. "Hey Isaac, how is it looking out there?" "Full section replacement on about 8 feet of pipe," I told him. "Cast iron is completely shot. I am going to need to shut down the main to do the work safely." "How many houses will that affect?" I looked at my notes. "Looks like about 6 properties on this block." "I will need to notify them all before I shut off the water." "Do what you need to do," Dave said. "Let me know when you are ready, and I will coordinate the shutdown from our end." After I hung up, Susan was still standing there, tapping her foot impatiently. "Well, I am going to need to shut off water to this block for a few hours while we make the repair," I explained. "I need to notify all the affected homeowners first." "Shut off the water." Susan's voice went up several octaves. "You absolutely cannot shut off my water. I have not taken my shower yet." "Madam, it is an emergency repair. The water needs to be shut off for safety reasons and to complete the work. You will have a few hours to take your shower before we shut it down." "A few hours? I work from home. I need water access throughout the day." She was practically hyperventilating now. "You cannot just shut off my water without my permission." Tommy had climbed out of the truck and was standing nearby, trying not to laugh. I shot him a warning look before turning back to Susan. "Madam, this is not optional. The water must be shut off to complete the repair." "It is a temporary shutdown, probably 3 to 4 hours at most." "I do not care if it is temporary. This is absolutely unacceptable." She pulled out her phone again. "I am calling my lawyer. You do what you need to do, madam," I said, exhausted by this conversation. "In the meantime, I have work to do." I started walking toward Brenda's house to notify her about the water shutdown, and I heard Susan on the phone behind me, voice shrill and angry. "Yes, I need to speak to someone about illegal construction in my neighborhood. These people are threatening to shut off my water." Brenda answered her door looking stressed. I heard Susan yelling again. "What is going on now?" I explained the situation with the water shutdown and she just sighed. "Do what you need to do, Isaac. I appreciate you fixing this." "The water pressure has been terrible for weeks." "That was probably because of this leak," I said. "It has been getting progressively worse. I am surprised the whole line did not blow out." "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" Brenda asked. 15 years. Started right out of trade school and never looked back." "Well, I am glad the city called someone competent. And I am sorry about Susan. She means well, I think, but she takes the HOA stuff way too seriously." "Does she do this kind of thing often?" Brenda laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Oh, constantly. Last month she tried to fine the Hendersons because their Christmas lights were still up on January 3rd. She said the HOA rules clearly state all holiday decorations must be removed by January 1st. She actually went over there with a tape measure and a camera to document the violation." I shook my head. "That is excessive even for an HOA president. You do not know the half of it. She once called animal control on the Martins because their dog barked twice while they were getting the mail." "Twice?" "She claimed it was disturbing the peace." I thanked Brenda for her patience and moved on to notify the other affected homeowners. Most of them were understanding, though a few were annoyed about the inconvenience. One elderly man, Mr. Gregor, actually thanked me profusely. "That Susan woman has been complaining about the water pressure for months," he said. "Kept insisting it was everyone else's fault for using too much water. Nice to know it was actually a leak the whole time." By the time I got back to the worksite, Susan was standing there with another woman, this one in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase, and she had the look of someone who thought she was much more important than she actually was. "Are you Isaac Patterson?" the new woman asked in a clipped, officious tone. "That is me. I am Deborah Morrison, legal counsel for the Wellington Heights Homeowners Association. I am here to inform you that you are in violation of multiple HOA regulations, and if you do not cease work immediately, we will be filing for an emergency injunction." I had to physically restrain myself from laughing. "Madam, with all due respect, the HOA has no legal authority over public utility repairs. I already explained this to Susan, and the police confirmed it when they were here earlier." "The police are not legal experts," Deborah said, pulling a document out of her briefcase. "I have here a copy of the Wellington Heights HOA bylaws, which clearly state that any construction or excavation work within the neighborhood boundaries must have prior written approval from the HOA board. Those bylaws do not apply to public infrastructure on public property," I said, my patience wearing thin. "The street is not HOA property. The water main under the street is definitely not HOA property. You have no jurisdiction here." "We will let a judge decide that," Deborah said smugly. "I will be filing for an emergency injunction this afternoon." "You go ahead and do that," I said. "In the meantime, I have a job to do. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to coordinate the water shutdown with the city." I turned my back on both of them and walked over to the excavation where Tommy was waiting. "Boss, this is getting weird even for an HOA situation. Tell me about it. I have never had one threaten legal action before." "Are we good to keep working?" Jake asked, looking nervous. "I do not want to get arrested or something." "We are fine," I assured him. "They are bluffing. No judge is going to grant an injunction to stop emergency utility repairs." I called Dave at the water department and gave him the go-ahead to coordinate the shutdown. He said it would take about 30 minutes to get everything in place on their end. In the meantime, we started prepping the new section of pipe and getting our tools organized. Susan and Deborah had moved back to Susan's driveway and were having an animated conversation. Susan kept pointing at us and making exaggerated gestures. Every few minutes, Deborah would nod and write something down on a legal pad. $10 says they are trying to figure out how many violations they can charge us with, Tommy said, watching them. $20 says they try to call the cops again, Jake countered. "You are both wrong," said Marcus, our newest crew member who had been quiet up until now. "They are going to call the news. These HOA types love getting the media involved." As it turned out, Marcus was right. About 20 minutes later, a news van from a local station pulled up. A reporter got out, a young woman with perfect hair and too much makeup, followed by a cameraman. Susan rushed over to them immediately, and I could hear her launching into her story. "These men just came into our neighborhood this morning with no warning and started destroying our street. They are violating multiple HOA regulations and have refused to stop work, despite being informed that they are breaking the rules." The reporter looked interested. "And you are?" "Susan Hendricks, president of the Wellington Heights Homeowners Association. We have very strict standards in this neighborhood, and these contractors are completely disregarding them." Susan Hendricks. Finally, I had a last name to go with the attitude. The reporter started filming, and Susan launched into a dramatic retelling of the morning's events, somehow managing to make herself sound like the victim of some kind of assault rather than a busybody trying to stop legitimate utility work. She completely left out the part about the water main break, the emergency authorization, and the police confirming that we were operating legally. After Susan finished her interview, the reporter headed toward our work site. "Excuse me, are you the contractor in charge here?" "Isaac Patterson, Patterson Utilities," I said, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. "Can you tell me what is going on here?" She held the microphone toward me while her cameraman started filming. I explained the situation clearly and concisely. "Water main break, emergency call from the city, proper permits and authorization, necessary repairs to restore service to the neighborhood." The reporter seemed less interested in my explanation than she had been in Susan's dramatics, but she filmed it anyway. "And what do you say to the HOA's claims that you are violating neighborhood regulations?" she asked. "The HOA has no authority over public utility repairs on public property," I said. "The street and the water main underneath it are owned and maintained by the city. We have full authorization to be here, which has been confirmed by both the water department and the Denver police." The reporter thanked me and went back to film some B-roll of the excavation. I knew how this was going to play out. They would probably air Susan's outraged complaints prominently and bury my explanation at the end, making it look like we were the bad guys. That was just how local news worked. Sure enough, my phone started ringing about 10 minutes later. It was Dave from the water department again. "Isaac, I just got a call from my supervisor. Apparently, there is a news crew out at your location." "Yeah," the HOA president called them. "She is trying to make it look like we are out here destroying the neighborhood for fun." Dave sighed. "Please tell me you explained the situation to them." Of course I did. But you know how it is. The angry HOA president makes for better television than the guy just doing his job. "Well, just so you know, my supervisor is backing you 100%. If anyone tries to stop this repair, they are going to have to answer to the city. This leak is serious and it needs to be fixed today." "Good to know. We are just waiting on the water shutdown now, and then we can get the new section installed." After I hung up, Susan came marching back over, Deborah in tow. "I just spoke with the news station," Susan announced triumphantly. "They are going to run a story about this on the noon broadcast. Once people see how you are treating our neighborhood, you will be finished in this city." I checked my watch. It was 11:15. "That is great, Susan. I am sure people will be really upset to learn that someone is fixing their water main." "You think you are so smart," Susan hissed, "but you have no idea who you are dealing with. My husband is a senior partner at Morrison and Associates. We have connections all over this city." "Is that the same Morrison as your lawyer here?" I asked, gesturing to Deborah. Susan looked momentarily flustered. "She is my sister-in-law, if you must know, and she is an excellent attorney." That explained a lot. This was turning into a family affair. "Look, Susan, I am just trying to do my job," I said, trying one more time to be reasonable. "I know this is disruptive and inconvenient, but there is a serious problem with your water infrastructure. If we do not fix this today, it is only going to get worse." "You should have coordinated with the HOA first," Susan insisted. "That is what a responsible contractor would have done. I was called out on an emergency basis at 5:30 this morning. The HOA office does not open until 9. By the time I could have contacted anyone, I would have already been 2 hours behind schedule, and this repair cannot wait," Deborah chimed in. "Regardless of the timing, the HOA bylaws are clear. All construction must be approved in advance." No exceptions. Those bylaws do not apply to emergency utility work on public property. I repeated for what felt like the 100th time. I do not know how else to explain this to you. We will see what the judge says, Deborah replied coolly. They walked away again, and I went back to work. Dave called to let me know the water would be shutting off in 5 minutes, so we got everything ready for the installation. As predicted, the water pressure dropped to 0 right on schedule, and we could finally safely remove the damaged section of pipe. The work itself was straightforward for someone with my experience. Cut out the bad section, clean up the ends, install the new pipe with proper couplings, test everything for leaks, and backfill the trench. On a good day with no complications, it would take maybe 3 hours. But this was clearly not going to be a good day. We were about an hour into the installation, working steadily and making good progress, when I heard shouting from the street. I looked up to see Susan standing at the edge of the excavation again, this time with her phone held up and clearly recording video. "This is completely unacceptable," she was yelling, presumably for the benefit of her video. "These contractors have shut off water to our entire street without proper notice. My husband cannot work from home without water access. This is a violation of our rights as homeowners." I ignored her and kept working. Engaging with her at this point was only going to make things worse. "I am talking to you," Susan shrieked, apparently offended that I was not paying attention to her performance. "You cannot just ignore me. I am the HOA president." Tommy, who was working next to me in the trench, muttered under his breath, "Someone should really tell her that is not the power position she thinks it is." We got the new pipe section installed and were starting the pressure tests when another car pulled up. This one was an expensive BMW, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of aggressive entitlement that could only come from years of never facing consequences for anything. "Which one of you is in charge here?" he demanded, not even bothering with pleasantries. I climbed out of the trench. "That would be me, Isaac Patterson. Richard Hendricks. I am Susan's husband. I understand you have shut off water to our home without authorization." "I have full authorization from the Denver Water Department," I said. "The water had to be shut off temporarily to complete the repair safely. We notified all affected homeowners in advance. My wife is the president of the HOA. That makes our home a priority. You should have consulted with us before making any decisions that affect our water service." I stared at him for a moment, trying to process this logic. "Sir, this is an emergency repair. Everyone on this block was treated the same. No one gets priority." "That is unacceptable," Richard said, his face reddening. "Do you have any idea how much I pay in HOA fees, how much my home is worth? You cannot treat us like common residents." "Actually, that is exactly what I can do," I said, my patience finally snapping. "Your HOA fees do not give you special privileges when it comes to public utilities. The water main serves everyone equally." Richard moved closer, invading my personal space in what I assumed was supposed to be an intimidating gesture. "Listen to me very carefully. My law firm handles millions of dollars in contracts every year. I can bury you in litigation so deep you will never see daylight again. Either you prioritize our water service, or I will sue you personally for every penny you have got." This had officially crossed the line from annoying to potentially criminal. "Sir, are you threatening me?" "I am explaining your options," Richard said with a nasty smile. "Boss, you want me to call the cops?" Tommy called out from the excavation. Before I could answer, Officer Martinez's patrol car pulled up again. She got out and walked over with an expression that suggested she had already figured out what was happening. "We got a call about a disturbance." What seems to be the problem? Richard immediately changed his demeanor, suddenly all friendly and reasonable. Officer, thank God you are here. This contractor has shut off our water without proper authorization, and he is refusing to restore our service. Officer Martinez looked at me. Mr. Patterson, we are in the middle of installing the replacement pipe section, I explained. The water is shut off temporarily for safety reasons, exactly as I explained to all the affected homeowners this morning. We are looking at maybe another hour and a half before we can restore service. That is completely unreasonable, Susan had joined her husband now, the two of them presenting a united front of outrage. We have rights. We pay taxes. You cannot just shut off our water for hours. Officer Martinez held up her hand. Madam, sir, this is a legitimate emergency repair. The contractor has to shut off the water to complete the work safely. It is temporary and it affects everyone on this block equally. But I am the HOA president, Susan protested. That should count for something. It does not, Officer Martinez said flatly. Madam, I need you and your husband to step back and let these workers finish their job. You are interfering with legitimate utility work. Richard pulled out his phone. I am calling the mayor's office. This is completely unacceptable. You do what you need to do, sir, Officer Martinez said. But right now, you need to step away from this work site. The Hendricks retreated to their driveway, both of them on their phones, presumably calling every person they thought might be able to help them. Officer Martinez came over to me and lowered her voice. These people are something else. You are telling me, I said. The husband just threatened to sue me personally if I did not prioritize their water service over everyone else's. Officer Martinez raised her eyebrows. He threatened you. Said he would bury me in litigation if I did not give them special treatment. Did anyone else hear this? My whole crew, I said, gesturing to Tommy and the others. They can all verify it. Officer Martinez walked over to Richard. Sir, did you threaten Mr. Patterson with legal action if he did not prioritize your water service? Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. I simply explained that I have legal resources available if he continues to provide inadequate service. That sounds like a threat to me, Officer Martinez said. Sir, interfering with utility workers in the performance of their duties is a criminal offense. Threatening someone to coerce them into giving you special treatment could also constitute extortion depending on the circumstances. Extortion? Richard looked shocked. That is ridiculous. I was just explaining the situation. The situation is that you wanted special treatment and threatened legal action to get it, Officer Martinez said. That is not legal. I suggest you and your wife go inside and let these workers do their job. If you continue to interfere, I will have no choice but to cite you. Susan looked like she was about to start screaming again, but Richard grabbed her arm. Come on, Susan. Let us go inside and call the mayor. They retreated into their house, but I could see Susan's face pressed against the window watching us. I turned back to Officer Martinez. Thanks for that. This has been the most difficult job I have had in years. Some people think rules do not apply to them, she said. HOA board members are often the worst offenders. They get a little bit of power and it goes straight to their heads. After Officer Martinez left, we were finally able to work without interruption. The pressure tests came back clean, no leaks in the new section. We started backfilling the trench and preparing to restore water service. By 2:30 p.m. we were ready to call Dave and have him turn the water back on. How did it go? Dave asked when I called. The repair is solid, no leaks. We are ready for you to restore pressure whenever you are ready on your end. Give me about 15 minutes, Dave said. And hey, my supervisor wanted me to pass along that the mayor's office did get a call from someone on Sycamore Drive. Apparently, there was a very angry woman demanding that we fire you and compensate her for the inconvenience. I laughed. Let me guess, Susan Hendricks. How did you know? Long story. What did your supervisor say? He told them that you were performing emergency repairs with full authorization and that if they had a problem with it, they could file a formal complaint, which, of course, would be immediately denied because, again, emergency repairs. Good to know the city has my back. Always. You do good work, Isaac. We are not going to throw you under the bus just because some HOA president got her feelings hurt. Water pressure was restored by 3 p.m. I tested the system thoroughly, checking for any signs of leaks or problems. Everything was perfect. The new section of pipe was solid, properly installed, and would probably last another 50 years. We were in the process of finishing the backfill and compacting the soil when the news van came back. The same reporter from earlier got out, but this time she was alone, no cameraman. She walked over to me with a slightly apologetic expression. Mr. Patterson, I wanted to follow up with you. We did some checking after we left here this morning, and it turns out you were right about everything. The city confirmed you have full authorization, and the police confirmed the HOA has no jurisdiction over this work. So you are not going to run a story making me look like the bad guy? I asked. She smiled. Actually, we are going to run a story, but not the one Susan Hendricks was hoping for. We want to do a piece about the challenges utility workers face with overzealous HOAs. Would you be willing to do a brief interview? I thought about it for a moment. On one hand, I usually preferred to keep a low profile. On the other hand, maybe it would be good to shine a light on how ridiculous some HOA situations could get. Sure, why not? The interview took about 10 minutes. I explained the situation clearly, emphasized that I was just doing my job, and pointed out that the water main repair was essential infrastructure work that could not wait for HOA approval. The reporter seemed genuinely interested and asked good questions. One more thing, she said as we were wrapping up. Susan Hendricks claimed you were rude and dismissive to her. Is that accurate? I was professional and polite, even after she called the police on me, threatened to sue me, had her husband threaten me, called a lawyer to try to stop the work, and generally did everything possible to prevent me from fixing a serious infrastructure problem that was affecting her own water service, I said. If that counts as rude and dismissive, then I guess I am guilty. The reporter grinned. I think we have everything we need. This should air on the evening news tonight. Thank you for your time, Mr. Patterson. After she left, we finished compacting the soil and cleaning up the work site. The street was not going to be perfectly smooth until the city came back to do the final paving work, but it was safe and passable. All our equipment was packed up and ready to go by 4:30. I was doing a final walk around to make sure we had not left anything behind when Brenda came out of her house. Isaac, thank you so much for fixing this. The water pressure is already so much better. Happy to help. Sorry about all the drama with your neighbor. Oh, that is just Susan being Susan, Brenda said with a wave of her hand. She will calm down eventually, probably. Has she always been this intense about HOA stuff, ever since she became president 3 years ago? She ran on a platform of strict enforcement of community standards, and she has definitely delivered on that promise. I think she writes more violation notices in a month than the previous 5 presidents combined wrote in their entire terms. Sounds exhausting. It is. Half the neighborhood cannot stand her, but the other half loves her because their property values have gone up since she started cracking down on any houses that do not meet her standards. I shook my head. Property values do not mean much if you have to live next to someone who calls the cops on utility workers. Agreed, Anyway, thanks again for everything. I hope the rest of your day is less stressful. Thanks, Brenda. Take care. We convoyed out of the neighborhood around 5 p.m. I was exhausted, not so much from the physical work as from dealing with Susan Hendricks and her family all day. Tommy rode with me, and he could not stop talking about it. Boss, that was insane. I have been doing this work for 8 years, and I have never seen anyone lose their mind like that over a water main repair. Some people just cannot handle not being in control, I said. The HOA gave her a little bit of power, and she thinks that means she runs the entire world. You think they are actually going to try to sue you? Probably not. It was all bluster, but if they do, they will lose. We did everything by the book. My phone rang as we were pulling into the shop. It was a number I did not recognize, but with the area code for Denver. I answered cautiously. This is Isaac Patterson. Mr. Patterson, this is James Chen with the Denver Water Department's Legal Division. I wanted to reach out to you regarding the incident on Sycamore Drive today. My stomach dropped. This could not be good. Yes, sir. What can I do for you? I want to let you know that we received a formal complaint from Susan Hendricks and her attorney, alleging negligence, harassment, and destruction of property. I have reviewed the complaint, along with the permits, work orders, and statements from our field supervisor. The complaint is entirely without merit, and we will be formally rejecting it tomorrow. I felt relief wash over me. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you letting me know. Additionally, we will be sending a letter to Mrs. Hendricks informing her that frivolous complaints against contractors performing emergency work on behalf of the city will not be tolerated. If she continues to interfere with legitimate utility work, we will pursue legal action against her personally. I appreciate that more than you know. You did good work today, Mr. Patterson. We have dealt with the Wellington Heights HOA before, and they have a history of trying to interfere with city operations. It is time someone pushed back. After I hung up, I filled Tommy in on the conversation. He let out a whoop. Yes, finally, that woman is going to get what is coming to her. I will believe it when I see it, I said. People like Susan Hendricks usually manage to avoid consequences. But I was wrong about that. The evening news ran the story just like the reporter had promised. It was actually a pretty good piece. They showed footage of the excavation, interviewed me about the situation, and then brought in a legal expert who explained that HOAs have no authority over public utilities or emergency repairs. They did include a brief clip of Susan ranting about her rights, but it was edited in a way that made her look unreasonable and out of touch. The final segment featured the water department spokesman, emphasizing the importance of letting utility workers do their jobs without interference. The story got picked up by several other local news outlets, and even made it onto some national news websites under headlines like HOA President Tries to Stop Water Main Repair, and Karen Calls Cops on Emergency Utility Work. My phone started ringing off the hook. Other contractors calling to share their own HOA horror stories. Friends sending me links to the news coverage. Even a few reporters wanting follow-up interviews. I declined most of them. I had said my piece, and I did not want to turn this into more of a circus than it already was. But the real fallout was yet to come. 3 days after the incident, I got a call from Brenda. Isaac, you are not going to believe what happened. Susan just got voted out as HOA president. Seriously. There was an emergency board meeting last night. Apparently, the other board members were furious about all the negative publicity. Several homeowners showed up demanding her resignation. It got pretty heated. In the end, they took a vote and removed her from the position. Wow, I did not think it would actually go that far. That is not even the best part, Brenda said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Remember how Susan was threatening to sue you? Well, turns out she used HOA funds to pay her sister-in-law to draft that complaint against you. She did not get approval from the board first, and using HOA money for personal legal matters is specifically prohibited in the bylaws." "Oh no." "Oh yes. The board is demanding she reimburse the HOA for the legal fees. And they are talking about filing a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board for misuse of association funds." "How much money are we talking about?" "I heard it was around $3,000. I whistled. "That is a lot of money to waste on a frivolous complaint." "That is not even the worst part for Susan. Remember how her husband threatened you? Apparently, someone recorded that interaction and it got back to his law firm. There is a rumor going around that the firm is investigating him for ethical violations. Who recorded it? No idea. Could have been anyone. Half the neighborhood was watching from their windows by that point." Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to escalate. Susan's husband, Richard, ended up facing a disciplinary hearing with the Colorado State Bar Association. Several of his firm's clients had seen the news coverage and raised concerns about his conduct. While he was not disbarred, he did receive a formal reprimand and was required to complete additional ethics training. Susan herself faced consequences from multiple directions. The HOA board did file a complaint with the State Oversight Board, which resulted in a formal investigation. She was required to reimburse the HOA for the misused funds, and she was permanently barred from serving on the board again. But the real kicker came about 6 weeks after the original incident. The city of Denver filed a lawsuit against Susan Hendricks personally for interfering with emergency utility work. I was called to give a deposition, along with my crew members and the police officers who had responded to the scene. The deposition took place in a downtown office building, in a conference room that was far too fancy for what should have been a simple case. Susan's new lawyer, notably not her sister-in-law, tried to paint her as a concerned homeowner who was just trying to protect her neighborhood. The city's attorney systematically demolished every argument, presenting the permits, the police reports, the work orders, and testimony from everyone involved. Susan herself was belligerent and uncooperative during her deposition. She insisted she had done nothing wrong, that the HOA gave her the authority to control what happened in the neighborhood, and that I should have sought her permission before starting work. Her lawyer kept trying to get her to stop talking, but she was on a roll. "I was elected HOA president to maintain standards," she said at one point. "If we just let any contractor come in and tear up our streets whenever they want, where does it end? Next thing you know, people will be parking RVs in their driveways and painting their houses purple." The city's attorney let her rant for a while before calmly asking, "Mrs. Hendricks, do you understand the difference between private property within the HOA boundaries and public infrastructure like streets and water mains?" "Of course I do," Susan snapped. "But the street is in our neighborhood, which means we have a say in what happens on it." "That is not correct," the attorney said. "The street is owned and maintained by the city of Denver. The HOA has no authority over it whatsoever." "That cannot be right. We pay to maintain this neighborhood. Our fees cover everything. Your HOA fees cover common areas and amenities within the HOA's actual property boundaries. They do not give you authority over public streets or utilities." Susan's lawyer jumped in at that point, calling for a break. When they came back, Susan was noticeably more subdued, clearly having been counseled to stop talking. The case was settled out of court about 3 months later. Susan was required to pay a fine of $15,000 to the city. issue a formal written apology to me and my crew, and attend a series of classes on HOA law and proper procedures. The settlement also included a permanent injunction prohibiting her from interfering with any city operations or utility work in the future. I never saw Susan Hendricks again after that day in the deposition. According to Brenda, Susan and Richard ended up selling their house and moving to a different neighborhood. Apparently, the negative publicity and the judgment from their neighbors became too much to handle. The new HOA president is so much better, Brenda told me during a phone call about 6 months after the original incident. Her name is Patricia, and she actually asks for input before making decisions. It is like night and day. That is great to hear. How is your water pressure these days? Perfect. Whatever you did, it fixed the problem completely. That is what we do. Fix problems even when HOA presidents try to stop us. The story did not end there, though. About a year after the incident, I got a call from a production company in Los Angeles. They were developing a television show about ridiculous HOA disputes, and they wanted to feature my story as one of the episodes. We are calling it HOA Hell, the producer explained. Each episode will recreate a real incident where an HOA took things too far. Your story is perfect because it has everything. The unreasonable HOA president, the threats, the police involvement, the news coverage, and actual legal consequences. I do not know, I said. It was a pretty stressful experience. I am not sure I want to relive it. We would compensate you, of course, and we would change the names and some of the details to protect everyone's privacy. Think of it as a cautionary tale about what not to do when you are in charge of an HOA. I thought about it for a few days before agreeing. They sent me a contract and a check, and about 6 months later the episode aired. They did change the names and the location, setting it in a fictional suburb of Phoenix instead of Denver. But the basic story was all there. The actor they cast as the HOA president absolutely nailed Susan's particular brand of entitled fury. The episode ended up being one of the most popular of the season. I got messages from contractors all over the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. It seemed like everyone had at least one experience with an unreasonable board member who thought they ruled the world. As for me, I continued doing utility work in the Denver area. The Sycamore Drive incident became something of a legend in the local contracting community. Whenever I ran into other contractors at supply houses or on job sites, someone would inevitably bring it up. Hey, are not you the guy who had that crazy HOA president call the cops on you? They would ask. That is me. Man, that was wild. I watched that news story like 5 times. The look on her face when they said you were repairing her own water main was priceless. Actually, that was not quite how it had happened. Susan had not been there when Officer Martinez explained what I was doing. But the news story had taken some creative liberties, and the narrative had taken on a life of its own. I did not bother correcting people. The basic facts were true enough. I did make one change to my business practices after the Susan Hendricks incident. Now, whenever I get called out for emergency utility work in an HOA neighborhood, I make a point of notifying the HOA board as soon as possible, even if it is not legally required. Not because they have any authority to stop me, but because it heads off potential problems before they start. A simple email saying, "We are performing emergency repairs on Elm Street. Here are our permits and authorizations," goes a long way toward preventing another Sycamore Drive situation. Most HOA boards are reasonable when you communicate with them. They appreciate being kept in the loop, even about things that are technically outside their jurisdiction. It is only the rare few, like Susan, who let the tiny amount of power go to their heads and turn every situation into a battle. Looking back on it now, several years later, the whole incident seems almost surreal. I was just trying to fix a water main, and it turned into this massive drama involving the police, lawyers, the news media, and eventually a television show. All because one person could not accept that she did not have absolute authority over everything that happened in her neighborhood. The ironic thing is that if Susan had just let me do my job that first morning, none of it would have happened. The repair would have been completed in a few hours, and everyone would have moved on with their lives. Instead, her need to exert control over the situation led to her losing her position, facing legal consequences, and ultimately having to move out of the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. I ran into Officer Martinez a few years later at a community safety event. She remembered me immediately. "Patterson, the water main guy, how have you been?" "Good, good. Still fixing pipes, trying to stay out of trouble. Any more run-ins with crazy HOA presidents?" "A few close calls, but nothing like that day on Sycamore Drive." "That was something else," she said, shaking her head at the memory. "I have been a cop for 20 years, and that was one of the most bizarre calls I have ever responded to. Woman calling 911 because someone was fixing her infrastructure. I have seen it all now. You know whatever happened to Susan Hendricks? I heard she moved away, but that is all I know." "I should not really say," Officer Martinez said, lowering her voice. "But between you and me, she tried the same thing in her new neighborhood. Different HOA, same attitude. Except this time she called the cops on someone fixing a gas leak. The gas company filed charges against her for interfering with emergency services. Last I heard, she was facing criminal charges." Wow, some people never learn. You got that right. The Wellington Heights neighborhood itself underwent some changes in the years following the incident. The new HOA board, led by President Patricia Chen, who turned out to be Officer Chen's mother, implemented new bylaws that emphasized community cooperation over strict enforcement. They created an oversight committee to review any proposed fines or legal actions to prevent the kind of overreach that Susan had been known for. Property values in the neighborhood actually went up after Susan left, despite her claims that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain home values. Turns out people were willing to pay a premium to live in a neighborhood where the HOA was not run by someone on a power trip. Brenda Lawson, whose property had been closest to the water main break, became one of my regular customers. She had me back a few years later to replace some old sewer lines, and we stayed in touch. She sent me a Christmas card every year with updates about the neighborhood. "Remember that spot where you dug up the street to fix the water main?" one card read. "They planted a tree there last spring. It is beautiful. We call it the Susan tree because it marks the spot where her reign of terror finally ended." I framed that card and hung it in my office. Tommy, my foreman who had been with me that day, eventually started his own contracting business. We stayed friends and occasionally worked together on larger projects. He never let me forget about the Susan Hendricks incident. "Remember that time you got famous for fixing a water main?" he would say, usually when we were having beers after a long day. "I am not famous. One news story does not make you famous. Dude, you were on a television show. That is pretty famous. It was one episode of a cable show that got canceled after 2 seasons. Still counts." The legal settlement money I received from the case against Susan went toward buying new equipment for my business. Specifically, a brand new backhoe to replace the aging one I had been using. I had a small plaque made and attached it to the cab. "The Susan Special." My crew thought it was hilarious. Customers who knew the story would see it and laugh. It became a conversation starter, a way to break the ice on jobs. And every time I climbed into that cab and fired up the engine, I thought about that morning on Sycamore Drive, about Susan Hendricks in her pink bathrobe and curlers, screaming about noise ordinances while I tried to fix her neighborhood's water supply. The whole experience taught me a lot about human nature, about how a little bit of power can corrupt someone who is already inclined toward controlling behavior, about how people can get so caught up in enforcing rules that they lose sight of the purpose behind those rules, and about how sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep your head down and do your job, even when someone is screaming at you that you are doing it wrong. It also taught me about the importance of documentation. The permits, the work orders, the photos, the written notifications to homeowners, all of it ended up being crucial when Susan tried to make trouble. If I had not been meticulous about documenting everything, her complaints might have actually stuck. These days, I run a successful contracting business with a solid reputation. The Susan Hendricks incident, instead of hurting my business, actually helped it. People saw how I handled an unreasonable situation with professionalism and proper procedure. They saw that I stood my ground when I was in the right, and they saw that I knew how to navigate the complicated intersection of municipal regulations, HOA rules, and emergency service requirements. I get calls now specifically because of that incident. Are you the guy from that HOA story? Potential clients will ask. When I confirm that I am, they usually say something like, "Good. I want someone who is not going to back down if my HOA gives them trouble." The irony is not lost on me that Susan Hendricks, in trying to stop me from doing my job, actually ended up being the best advertisement my business ever had. I still work in the Denver area, still fix water mains and sewer lines, still deal with the occasional difficult HOA. But these days, when someone starts giving me grief about permits or procedures, I calmly pull out my documentation, explain the legal situation, and if necessary, mention that I have been through this before, and I know exactly what I am doing. Most people back down at that point. The few who do not usually end up learning the same lesson Susan did. That interfering with legitimate emergency utility work is a losing battle that will only end badly for them. The city of Denver eventually updated their procedures for emergency utility work in HOA neighborhoods, partly because of the Wellington Heights incident. Now, when they dispatch contractors for emergency repairs, they automatically send notification to the relevant HOA board simultaneously. It is not required by law, but it is a courtesy that prevents misunderstandings. The Denver Water Department also created a liaison position specifically to handle HOA relations. Dave Richardson, who had been the supervisor I worked with during the Sycamore Drive incident, ended up taking that position. He told me it was created directly in response to the problems we had encountered with Susan. We realized we needed someone whose job was just to handle the HOAs, he explained. Someone who knows all the regulations and can explain them clearly when board members start getting territorial about utility work. That seems like a full-time job all by itself. You have no idea. I spend half my time explaining to HOA presidents that no, they do not have authority over water mains, and no, they cannot require city contractors to follow HOA architectural guidelines. I do not envy you that job. Hey, it beats being out in the field when it is 20 below zero. And at least nobody is calling the cops on me. Looking back now, the most satisfying part of the whole incident was not the legal settlement or the television show or even the new Backhoe. It was the letter I received about a month after the case was settled. It was from the Denver Water Department, formally thanking me for my professionalism and dedication in completing the emergency repair, despite significant interference. But attached to the official letter was a handwritten note from Dave. "Thanks for not backing down. We need contractors who will stand their ground when they are doing the right thing." Susan Hendricks was not the first HOA president to try to stop legitimate utility work, but maybe she will be the last now that people see what happens when you take it too far. I framed that letter too. It hangs right next to Brenda's Christmas card in my office. The water main I repaired that day is still functioning perfectly, as far as I know. The pipe section I installed should last for decades. Long after everyone has forgotten about Susan Hendricks and her pink bathrobe and her outraged phone calls, that pipe will still be there, quietly doing its job, carrying water to homes and families. Which, when you think about it, is kind of the perfect metaphor for the whole situation. The drama was loud and attention-grabbing, but in the end, it did not matter. What mattered was the work. What mattered was fixing the problem. What mattered was making sure people had clean water flowing to their homes. Susan Hendricks wanted to be important, wanted to exert control, wanted everyone to acknowledge her authority. But she forgot the most basic principle of community service. Your job is to help people, not to make yourself feel powerful. The new HOA president, Patricia, understood that. Under her leadership, Wellington Heights became known as one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the area, not because of strict enforcement or heavy-handed regulations, but because people actually wanted to live there. Because neighbors helped each other instead of calling the police on each other. Because the HOA facilitated community rather than controlling it. I drive through that neighborhood sometimes, even when I do not have work there. I like to see how it has evolved. The houses are well maintained, the lawns are neat, and there is an actual sense of community. Kids play in the streets, neighbors chat over fences. It looks like what a neighborhood should look like. And every time I drive past 4786 Sycamore Drive, the house that used to belong to Susan and Richard Hendricks, I think about that morning when everything went sideways. About the shocked look on Susan's face when the police told her I was there legally. About her increasingly desperate attempts to stop work that was actually benefiting her own home. About how she could not see past her own need for control to understand that sometimes you just need to let people do their jobs. The new owners of that house, according to Brenda, are lovely people. They have 2 kids and a golden retriever. They volunteer for neighborhood events. They have never filed an HOA complaint against anyone. They are, in short, exactly the kind of neighbors that communities need. And their water pressure, I am happy to report, is excellent.